Welcome to Santa Clarita Voices, where you hear the stories, meet the people, and discover the passion that makes Santa Clarita shine. From hidden heroes, local legends, and the visionaries shaping our future, we are uncovering the voices behind the scenes. Santa Clarita Voices is on air.
Welcome to the City of Santa Clarita's new podcast. I am City Manager Ken Striplin. Hopefully you had the opportunity to hear our first podcast where we had former Mayor Cameron Smythe sit and give a little bit of his perspective on City Hall. This is our second episode, and we are taking on a topic that has impacted cities throughout Southern California and around the nation: homelessness. We have two guests today with us: Chris Najarro, Executive Director of Bridge to Home, and Justin Diez, Captain of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
Chris, why don't you give us a little background on yourself and let everyone know a little bit about your background, where you came from, and a little about what you do at Bridge to Home.
Okay, so my background is in social work. I've been doing that for over 20 years now. I started as a case specialist for an organization in the Valley, the San Fernando Valley Child Care Resource Center, and then eventually came here to Santa Clarita to work with the homeless population through Family Promise. I was their first executive director, and then eventually transitioned to Bridge to Home in 2017 as the director of programs there, and then became the executive director of Bridge to Home in 2021.
Great. Well, welcome. You mentioned Family Promise.
Yeah.
So you've did Family Promise and Bridge to Home.
Yes.
So you pretty much have covered the whole gamut, or most of the gamut of homeless service providers here in the Santa Clarita Valley.
That's right.
That's great. That's
Proud
great.
of that.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Diaz, or excuse me, Captain Diaz, why don't you give us a little background about yourself?
Well, good morning. Good morning. So been on the Sheriff's Department 24 years. Been the captain of Santa Clarita Station coming up on 5 years, and that'll be in March. I live in Santa Clarita with my wife and two kids, and happy to be here today. Thanks for having me.
How long have you been the captain for us now?
5 years.
5 years. And if I'm not mistaken, I think you're probably like my eighth captain that I've had the opportunity to work with. And if I'm not mistaken, I think 5 years would give you probably the longest serving captain for Santa Clarita.
I think so. I've been very fortunate to do so, and obviously really happy to be in Santa Clarita. It's nice to work and live in the same place, and family's all here, and wife works out here, and kids go to school out here. So it's a great situation. We're very, very fortunate.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't say that out too loud, because once they find out how long you've been here, they're likely to take you away and send you somewhere else.
They might. You never know.
Do your good deeds. So
you never know.
Hopefully they don't watch this episode.
Hopefully.
All righty. So with that, you're both on the front lines of addressing homelessness in Santa Clarita. Can you share the role that you play in these efforts?
Sure. So Bridge to Home, our mission is to end homelessness in Santa Clarita, and that's a huge statement to make, for any community. But how we do it is through providing services, wraparound services for the clients that come to us, whether they're still sleeping on the streets or at our shelter. We provide case management services, shelter services, meals, showers, and we address their needs very specifically to the client, which everyone is different. And we work in partnership with organizations like the City of Santa Clarita, the County of Los Angeles, the State of California. And it's something we've been doing since 1997.
Yeah, you guys have really come a long way. The whole topic of homelessness in general has really evolved a great deal. Going back almost 30 years here in the city, I remember when homelessness really started becoming an issue here in Santa Clarita, and the controversy that surrounded it.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about now the beautiful facility that you guys were just able to complete and open up. How long ago?
It opened in July of 2024. Yeah, not even a year ago.
So that's a beautiful facility, amazing work being done there. But, thinking back almost, I think you said 97, where the homeless shelter was modular buildings and was literally rotating in different parts of the community because nobody in the community wanted the homeless shelter around them.
Right.
And so to come full circle, so many years later, and to see the building and the services and the full service center that you guys have put together, and the fact that the community really came out and supported it.
Yes.
By and large. I mean, the county and the city were big funding partners, but you guys also had a huge amount of support from the community to
Yeah.
help build that. So tell us a little bit about how did you fund that? I mean, besides the city and county, obviously.
Yeah, we're grateful for the government support because we couldn't do it without that, right? We had the federal government provide us funding, state government provide us funding, and like you said, the city and the county, but our community members also, and they step up all the time. So we're always so grateful for the community members of Santa Clarita, because when we ask, they always answer. And we raised over $1 million through their support to go towards this building that was very much needed, because we had been, like you said, in modular buildings since the very beginning, and they were falling apart. And to be able to serve people with dignity, that facility was absolutely necessary, and not only just for the clients, but also for our staff to be proud of the place where they go to work every day and meet those needs. In the winter time, it was really cold outside. In the summertime, it was really hot outside. And so if you ever visited our shelter, the modular buildings, you had to get to one building to the other. You always had to go outside to reach a client. You had to go outside to the elements, and it wasn't the best situation. We were grateful for it while we had it, because otherwise there would have been a shelter here in Santa Clarita. But now having this facility that's all indoors, the showers are indoors, nothing is mobile, is wonderful. Yeah.
Great, awesome. Captain Diez, tell us a little bit about how your interactions with homelessness on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, I think it's safe to say, and if you talk to any police officer in Santa Clarita, but probably anywhere within the country, they'll tell you that homelessness is at the forefront of policing. I'd say a modern day police officer, your three biggest things would be homelessness, mental health, and school security, right? And two of those three things are intertwined: the homelessness and the mental health.
That's right.
As law enforcement, we get calls for various homeless-related issues, whether it's somebody on a corner or perhaps some sort of mental health or drug-related issue, homeless encampments, things like that. Typically what we will do in Santa Clarita, we have a homeless outreach services deputy, which is a city-funded item. We started that, a few years ago, probably. Mm-hmm. The county's got a homeless outreach services team, but we determined, along with your partnership, that we wanted to do it at the station, have full-time deputy dedicated to it, which has been great. And ultimately what that deputy's job is to offer resources when they find somebody who's experiencing homelessness, whether that's family or an individual, and then work with city code enforcement for encampment abatements, things of that nature. So it actually, becomes quite a big task for law enforcement. Oftentimes, the people that are experiencing homelessness don't want services, and we'll talk about that in a little, down the road a little bit. But it's really become a big part of law enforcement, and I don't see it changing much anytime soon. I think the now is probably the future. I don't know, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's, you talk about mental health and law enforcement, and it's not just homelessness, right? Mental health and dealing with law enforcement and providing services has become a much bigger issue in the last few years than it's ever has been. And the homeless population, I think, is just a microcosm of that phenomenon. But you mentioned the services and them wanting services, not wanting services. And I think it's important for people to know that as you deal with issues with the homeless, whether it's encampment cleanups or whatever, there's a whole support team that typically goes with law enforcement to go out and offer those services to try to get people to off of the streets or out of the riverbeds or whatever it might be, in order to try to change their pathways, so to speak. Yeah. And sometimes that's successful, and probably most of the time it's not. But it's something that's consistently done with the multi-pronged approach, if you will, of dealing with law enforcement and homelessness and so on and so forth. So, kind of takes us into the next question. We've talked about homelessness, and I think there's kind of a perception of what people see as homeless. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how has the homeless population changed here, or the face of the homeless here in Santa Clarita? Because I think people see, the handful or however many people in the riverbeds or on the streets or whatever it might be, but that's really just a small piece of homelessness in Santa Clarita. So maybe, Chris, you can talk a little bit about what is the face of homelessness? What does that demographic look like?
Yeah, it affects everyone, right? It affects families. with young children, seniors, transitional aged youth, people, so everyone, college students, everyone that it could possibly affect, it affects. So we're sort of the face of homelessness, but it has changed over the years in terms of like, we see more people experiencing homelessness. I remember when I first started here in Santa Clarita, we didn't really have visual homelessness. It wasn't out on the streets too often, but now we're seeing that a little bit more, just like you're seeing that more in the Valley, the San Fernando Valley and Los Angeles areas. At our facility, we see that there's a lot more seniors experiencing homelessness, and they need the support. We're also, when I started with Family Promise, sometimes our shelter would stay open. We'd had open beds for our families. We've recently, like I mentioned, opened a family shelter in July, and it's 8 units that's never been empty. So we know that it's affecting families in greater amounts here in Santa Clarita, where we probably didn't have that so much in the past. And we're seeing our numbers climb. And, our services have expanded. So we're seeing more people come in just for a meal, for a shower, for laundry use. And that also wasn't as common. This probably changed when the pandemic happened. We started to see that our beds didn't remain open, and prior to the pandemic, we did have some empty beds, and so the need is far greater than ever before. And of course, that's there's a lot of reasons why that could be. One of the major reasons is affordable housing. We don't really have that locally here or in all of Los Angeles, and that's something that we need to address in order to make it more affordable for people that need to find housing. And of course, mental health issues are on the rise too, and people that are living in the streets, their mental health deteriorates much faster, and they don't have the support that they need in order to address that.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think when we talk about what the face of the homelessness, I think it was Bridge to Home not too long ago did a marketing piece or an educational piece that really showed the faces of the different people who experience homelessness.
Yeah.
And it gets away from the misconception of it's the people, the man or woman that you see sleeping on a bench or
Right.
coming out of the riverbed. That's like I said, it's a small portion of that. But people would probably be really surprised to hear about the children. I deal with the school. Obviously we have this homeless task force.
Right.
And homelessness can only be solved or impacted as a community effort.
Right.
Right. It's one organization by itself can't
Cannot
solve
do it.
homelessness. And so with the homeless task force that we have, I think there's over 20 to 25 different agencies
Yeah.
that touch homelessness in some way on a daily basis, and so trying to coordinate all of those people. But again, it goes everything from the elementary kids
Yes.
who are or experiencing some form of homelessness. The College of the Canyons talks about the issue of homelessness that they deal with those college age students, and then as you just mentioned, seniors. And I would imagine that the average person on the street, when they talk about homeless, don't associate homelessness with seniors.
Correct.
So how do you bring that awareness? How do you educate people that as you're dealing with that and trying to bring the community in to help solve the problem? How do you educate people to what that face of the homeless really looks like?
Yeah, we do it a lot through, our volunteers, inviting people to come in and see it firsthand. Because I think when you see it firsthand, that's going to make the biggest impact and actually go farther than just reading it in our newsletter or seeing it in our social media. We have those conversations regularly, and we encourage others that have worked with us, whether it's staff or volunteers or other organizations, to also do the same thing and to be very honest and open about what we're facing on a regular basis. So we try not to sugarcoat anything and tell everybody the real thing, and hopefully that message is understood and then shared with everyone in the community. We have events to do that too. But I think volunteering and bringing people into our shelter is the most important part and the best way to really showcase how homelessness is affecting our community.
Right. Captain Diez, how about you? The evolution of homelessness. How do you deal with deputies in terms of training them, educating them to deal with the various calls that you guys get, because whether it's a theft issue or someone just walking in the middle of the street or whatever it might be, how has the sheriff's department dealt with kind of bringing deputies along to deal with them a little bit differently because of the implied mental health issues and some of the things that Chris talked about in terms of their mental well-being?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As far as the training, there isn't any training on specifically homelessness training. The training would be in exactly what you mentioned, dealing with or interacting with the mental illness, the signs and symptoms of drug use, alcohol use, what resources are available, if somebody wants them, what legal resources we have to force somebody, into treatment, obviously different violations of the law and stuff. So, all of their training on de-escalation, all of their training on mental health, there's department mandated training, state of California mandated training, and, they have to be updated or, current with all their training. One thing, and taking a step backwards, one thing I wanted to talk about was the face of homelessness and what it looks like. And you kind of mentioned, people under the bridge or within the wash, and that is just a very small segment. And what we find is that when we try and get people help, and we partner either with the city code enforcement or with you guys or with LA County Mental Health or, you name it, whoever we go out there with, what other entities we go out there with, what we find is typically we get more cooperation with families that are experiencing homelessness.
That's true.
Maybe a single mother and a
Right.
child or two children. Sometimes there's, a family of four, a husband, a wife, and kids.
Yeah.
And so we have more success with that. I would say, our next category would be seniors, have more success with seniors, and then it takes a big drop off. Your next population would probably be, your adults, who aren't seniors and who aren't classified as family.
Right.
And those are the ones that are very difficult. Another interesting thing, speaking of the face of homeless in Santa Clarita, is our out-of-towners. So, and I don't know if you guys experience this, but our deputies certainly do. And, when I do my jail walks at the station and talk to them in the jail, very, 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 very few are from Santa Clarita. You'll start talking to them and you'll say, hey, where are you from? And they'll give you a, often bizarre story of being from out of county, out of state, not even West Coast, somewhere, in the middle of the country or East Coast. And then, you think, well, that's weird. Why would they, if they came out West, why would they stop in Santa Clarita? And, sometimes the conversation will get there, sometimes it won't. But very rare you get a straight answer, and very rare you get an answer why they wanted to stop in Santa Clarita. Sometimes we'll hear that the weather is good. Sometimes we'll hear that it's safe and they don't have to get involved in as many politics like you would, perhaps in another state or another county. Because what you don't think about is there's small communities in these homeless encampments. There's hierarchies in these communities. There's politics in these homeless encampments. And, they feel safe here, which some have told us, less politics, things like that. So it's very, very interesting to see that the overwhelming majority of our homeless, at least the ones that we are interacting with, maybe not at the shelter, but the ones we're interacting with are not from Santa Clarita, but they're from everywhere else.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, you can talk to this. I think the people that you deal with that are experiencing homelessness are from Santa Clarita.
Right, that's right.
So it's an interesting dichotomy that, out-of-towners or people coming in, kind of passing through or whatever it might be, versus the other side of the population,
That's
which
right.
really are born and raised or have lived in Santa Clarita for a very, very long time.
Yeah, we do. Most of our clients are from Santa Clarita. Of course, there are going to be some that are not, because people that are experiencing homelessness, they're going to take shelter wherever they can find it, right? And then they don't really have a residency in some ways. So that's why we have an open door. If we have a bed available and that person's knocking on the door, then we're going to accept them. We're not going to turn them away, and we legally can't, right? But also, the majority of the people are from Santa Clarita, and we made it a point, and we worked with our funders that when we opened our family shelter, that they would, that at least the very first 8 that we were going to accept are all from the city. And we worked with the Hart School District in order to identify them. And we also had other people that had already been calling. So all of those have been from Santa Clarita, and to this point have been families from the Santa Clarita Valley, because we knew it was important. We knew that family shelter in Santa Clarita was very limited. At that point, it was only Family Promise, and they only had 4. They could only serve 4 families at one time. So it was very important for us to be able to, and we had told the community also. The community has supported us. We created the shelter because it was needed here in Santa Clarita, and we were answering the need here. And so we didn't want to, open it up to other people, at least not to start. So we definitely experienced something different than the Sheriff's Department does. But, you have a little of everything.
We do have a little everything. And one other category I forgot to mention was, oftentimes you think of somebody in your shelter or maybe somebody in a tent under a bridge. But a big majority too, and I don't know the numbers, but a large percentage are couch surfers, right? We don't think about that a whole lot.
Yeah.
They're homeless, right? They don't necessarily have a address, right? But
Correct.
they're couch surfing from your house to my house, a few days there, a week there, a few days here, and then also throwing in a car or motorhome into that
Right.
mix as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of different categories, a lot of different age groups, and a lot of different situations or scenarios, at least here in Santa Clarita. And I would assume that's happening pretty much everywhere.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and I appreciate the commentary, and I think if you really look at how Santa Clarita deals with homelessness, it's how we deal with a lot of things here in Santa Clarita. As a city, we're pretty much geographically isolated, right? We're surrounded by mountains. We're not neighboring cities, anything else. So we find ourselves, the Northridge earthquake showed us very quickly how we could be cut off from, the rest of the world, so to speak. And I think that, for over 30 years, I've watched this community take on issues that affect residents, and we take care of ourselves. And Santa Clarita has always done that, whether it's through nonprofit organizations, developing our organizations, and we don't get a lot of help. We don't get a lot of help. A lot of the funding comes from the community or people volunteering, through the city government, or through the participation of Catherine Barger in the 5th District has been amazing as well.
Yeah.
But it's Santa Clarita taking care of Santa Clarita. And they're our residents, they're our neighbors, they're people that go to school with our kids, that we go to church with our neighbors, whatever it might be. So it really is the community stepping up and taking care of the community.
Right.
With the exception of, like you were talking about with the out-of-towners. But, that being said, we just built this big shelter for Bridge to Home, and Family Promise just opened up there in like the last week or so, right?
Yeah,
I think it was just in the last week or two.
Yeah.
Is that 6 or 8 units?
4.
4, also 4 family units.
And then they still have their transitional program. That's another 4.
So another 4, so 8
Yeah,
total.
8 total. Yeah.
So that's another project that the community, again, came together to fund and put together with the help of Catherine Barger as well. And again, so we just built these things, so we're on the road to solving it.
I wish.
No. Yeah.
No.
But it is a start. And
Yeah.
again, it's, you think about, other communities, and, I read a recent article lately where a city passed an ordinance where they banned all new homeless shelters.
Oh.
And so just different approaches of how we deal with it. I think the city, with the service providing, with law enforcement, with code enforcement, we take a very active approach to dealing with homelessness. I think when you leave Santa Clarita and you go to different areas, you see communities that have just given up, where homeless populations have overtaken the streets, they've overtaken corners, and it's hard to figure out how do you get back from that.
Right.
So with the active approachment, with law enforcement, with the resources, with the service providers, you talked about encampments. The city has done encampments for a number of years. And the reason we do that is what, Captain Diez was talking about. These encampments tend to kind of take on a life of their own. And you've seen in different communities where you allow encampments to sit there for years, and they get bigger and they get bigger and they get bigger. And it's very, very difficult to get in there to affect change. And so I think that's another component in terms of the multifaceted approach to dealing with homelessness. There's really not one thing.
Right.
You can't solve it with just the shelter with Bridge to Home.
Sure.
The Sheriff's Department can't solve it by arresting, every homeless person that commits a crime. It really is a community approach to dealing with all of this. So let's talk a little bit about the homeless count. The homeless count, maybe you can educate us a little about what is the homeless count, who does it, why do we do it, and what's it all about?
So the homeless count happens every year in January. This year it's on January 21st, and we do it in partnership with the City of Santa Clarita, with the Sheriff's Department, and also with LASA, who is our pass-through agency. They fund most of our programs, or a lot of our programs, in LA County, LA City, and it's a visual count. So for us, for Bridge to Home and our volunteers, we go out the night of the count, and this year it's the 21st. And we usually build teams between 2 to 4, and they go out in a vehicle and they survey the city. And they try to find anything that looks like it might be an encampment, or somebody that's experiencing homelessness that's out in the streets. And then we also take a shelter count. So we then report our numbers of how many people were in our shelter that night and report it back to LASA. They collect that information, and then they put together how many people are experiencing homelessness in LA County and specifically in each community. That drives funding. So then, for our organization or our community of Santa Clarita, we've typically been around the 200 range for most years that I've been here in the Santa Clarita Valley doing homelessness. But and then, of course, you have other communities, like you could compare it to North Hollywood, if it's just going to be in the thousands. So they're going to be receive a larger portion of funding than Santa Clarita will. But it really is a driver of that, and to also educate the community, and also for where's our progress? Have we been making a progress? Do we need to change something? And that's why it's done annually.
Gotcha. And I think the challenge with that is that you're putting people in cars to go around and
Right.
visually inspect.
Right.
And so, all the stuff we've talked about for the last, 20 minutes or so, there's so many faces of homelessness that if you're driving around, it's hard to pick those up.
Right, yeah.
So we know that number, somewhere between a little 200, 300, whatever that might be, probably isn't a complete, accurate
Yeah.
reflection of how many homeless people are existing
Correct.
here in Santa Clarita.
Yeah.
Because, you're probably not picking up the seniors, you're probably not picking up the school age kids and all of the different facets that we talked about.
That's right.
So that I think is a challenge, but it does lead to one big significant factor, which is funding.
Funding, yeah.
There was a Measure A, which was recently passed, was the second form of a tax initiative to support homeless services and deal with the homeless issue.
Yeah.
Measure H was the first one, which
Right.
was a quarter cent. I think it was quarter cent, right? Sales
Quarter
tax.
cent, yep.
And I think on an annual basis, the city of Santa Clarita was generating upwards of about $8 million a year, and contributing that to the cause,
Yeah.
which goes downtown to the county of Los Angeles. And then they're supposed to ship that money back out to deal with homelessness.
Right.
So for us, and I think I have my numbers here somewhere, we have generated somewhere since the tax initiative took place about $68 million. And we have received back in return for that contribution about $1 million. So there's a big disconnect in terms of how much money the Santa Clarita Valley or city, this is just city of Santa Clarita actually,
Correct, yeah.
is generating to help support the cause versus how much money is coming back.
Right.
So that's, with Measure A coming out, it's a little bit different. It's a half-cent sales tax, so there's more money generated from the tax initiative. But what do you see as coming back to the community or opportunities that are going to be different than maybe what we saw with Measure H?
So with Measure H, there was less oversight. So hopefully with Measure A, we'll see a better return because of that. And part of the reason was that the city of Santa Clarita wasn't the only city that was generating a large amount of that money and then receiving less. That was something that was addressed through Measure A, and hopefully we'll see a larger portion come back. We won't see it all because there is a greater need in other communities, but hopefully something more impactful. I'm hoping that, the other thing is that it's supposed to go to, a lot more is supposed to go to affordable housing, which we know is lacking. And I think that is, would provide a better answer to our homeless issues throughout LA County, and prevention. It's easier to prevent homelessness than address homelessness for those that are already experiencing it. So with those three things, we're hoping we'll see a better outcome with this new measure. And then it doesn't sunset, which is one of the biggest difference. So Measure H was supposed to sunset in 2027. It was a 10-year measure, and this one does not have that. So, it'll be continuous, and we will hopefully address the issue of homelessness and continue to, because like Captain Diez says, for the foreseeable future, we don't see it going away. It's such a huge issue right now that we need to think of more innovative ways to address it and work together as a community.
Yeah, hopefully in 8 years from now, we're not having the same
Hopefully
conversation
not,
where
yeah.
not $68 million, but $136 million was
Yeah.
contributed, and we're up to $2 million in return.
Right.
So, and I know that that's a big issue for the task force as well as the city, I'm sure the county and all the service providers, is how do we collectively come together to advocate for the needs of Santa Clarita? Our numbers may not be as big as some of the other communities, but we still have numbers and we still
Correct.
have community in need. So
Yeah.
how do we effectively advocate and get more of that money back? And then, like you said, how do we drive that towards programs that actually do make a difference?
Correct. Yeah. So, and we do have to work together. And one of the ways that we do it right now, we're trying to do it is through the task force and bringing everybody together in one room and talk about what everybody's needs are. It does bring, it does make a difference to get everyone in the same room and remember that we are not working alone and trying to address this, because there's a lot of intersection between, mental health, like say Child and Family Services or Family Promise, who only deals with families, and Bridge to Home, or Samuel Dixon, who deals with, medical needs and also mental health. So bringing everybody together and in one room on a regular basis and addressing that and reminding people that that we have each other to do this is important. And then we even have community volunteers in the task force. So, and again, we say this a lot at Bridge to Home, but we couldn't do it without the volunteers. There's just no way that we would be where we're at today if we didn't have our volunteers. I mean, they provide pretty much every meal every night for our clients that we see daily.
Yeah. And I have to go back a little bit because we talk about how much Measure H did not contribute. As city manager, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how much we did contribute. And as you look at those two shelters, or the Family Promise as well as Bridge to Home, the city council stepped up, purchased land valued over $3 million for both projects.
Right.
So created the foundation to build a project, so to speak. And then over time came up with $2 or $3 million, I think, on each side or something in that neighborhood to help with the construction of those facilities. So once again, it's not, we're not going to be holding our breath waiting for downtown LA to send us money to help solve our problems. It's the city, the volunteers.
I'm still praying for that, though.
Yeah, that's good. Prayers are good. So, Justin, tell us a little bit more about what are some of the things that the sheriff's department is doing to help mitigate some of the issues. Do you get several calls? What kind of calls do you guys get for service and deals with homelessness, and how do you typically deal with those calls?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So oftentimes we'll get calls in dispatch where somebody says, I see a homeless person on, fill in the street, McBean. And we have to tell them, well, it's not illegal to be homeless, right? And I'm actually really glad you asked this question. People need to know that, simply being homeless is not a crime. But, can a homeless person, can somebody who's experiencing homelessness commit a crime? Absolutely. So typical crimes that we will see, and again, I think this is great that all the insight you've given on the shelter, because they're two very different populations. Right. From what your population that you're serving versus the population that we're interacting with, very, very different populations. Not all the time, but most of the time it sounds like. But typical, things that we will deal with in the homeless population that we're interacting with, property crimes. So, what is that? That could be in the homeless encampments. It could be stolen mail, stolen furniture, bicycles, things like that. Assaults. There's a lot of assault on each other within these homeless encampments. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol. Many of them, again, have fled other counties, other states, and they are, they've got out-of-county warrants, out-of-state warrants, things like that. So it's pretty interesting, the different things that deputies will see. And again, and most of it comes back to mental illness. And then some sort of mental illness, but then self-medicating with drugs and alcohol, which exacerbates whatever type of mental illness they had. Unfortunately, a lot of our homeless population are veterans. We are very fortunate on the Sheriff's Department that not only do we have a mental evaluation team assigned full-time to our station, but we've also got a VMET, Veterans Mental Evaluation Team. Although they're not full-time at the station, our MET team at the station will work with the VMET team if they identify any veterans that they can help out. But really runs the gamut on who we see and what types of crimes they're committing. But again, I think the biggest take is for your average Joe in Santa Clarita, that simply being homeless is not a crime. Although we'll accept the call into dispatch and we'll explain it to you. Just something important to remember.
Yeah. So if they're just sitting around walking down the street, obviously that's not a call for service that the Sheriff's Department's going to run out unless there's something, to deal with. But other calls, if we have people standing in the middle of the medians, with their signs out, pandering, or if we have people, oftentimes we see people with mental health issues walking down the middle of the street and having episodes of that nature. So those are the kind of calls that the Sheriff's Department certainly will respond to, and because it is about the safety of the individual who may be experiencing some kind of mental health issue, but also the public at large if there's things that are that obvious. So those are the kind of calls that obviously the department deals with. Yeah,
absolutely. And those deputies are all trained in mental health, and they're going to go out there and they're going to know whether that person qualifies for a 72-hour hold under 5150 of the Welfares and Institution Code. So they're going to know that. Also, depending on the nature of the call, depending on the details of the call, the mental evaluation team may respond as well. But either way, there's going to be either a highly trained deputy sheriff and or somebody from the mental evaluation team, which, I guess now we're on the topic, we could mention that each mental evaluation team consists of a deputy sheriff and then a clinician from LA County Mental Health. So it's great. You get the law enforcement perspective and then the other side, the civilian perspective in it, and they really balance each other out really well. So once the deputies get out there, if they determine that person meets criteria for 5150, which would be a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or gravely disabled, then they can certainly take them over to Henry Mayo or all of you for a hold. And that's very common.
Very good, very good. All right, well, I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. Maybe one more question. How can community members, you talked a little bit about it, Chris, and Justin, I don't know if you have any other insights in terms of how, from a public safety standpoint, the community can be helpful for the Sheriff's Department. But what types of things can the community do to be helpful in helping deal with the issues, and specifically with Bridge to Home?
Yeah, volunteering. That's number one. What we would love to see. We already have a really large volunteer base, but we would love to see more people get involved and come in and volunteer for us. And in many different ways. We have events. You can volunteer and make a meal or donate a meal. Donating also, because, we, of course, every nonprofit needs financed in some way. So, and also just being compassionate and treating people with dignity. If they run into somebody that is experiencing homelessness, we don't know what they're exactly dealing with or what led them to living out in the streets. And we just need to be understanding. So I think that's the biggest thing, probably, to just be compassionate towards those that are living out in the streets. Yeah.
Great. So, Bridge, I know you guys have a couple of events on an annual basis where you're doing fundraising, which you just talked about.
Yes.
What are those events? Tell us about those events so the community has some insight into
on
this.
February 22nd, we have our annual Soup for the Soul Gala. And it's a night of coming together, learning more about Bridge to Home, seeing, our everybody that's on our team, our board of directors are there, people from the government that support us, and we usually have testimonies from some of our clients that have been through our program, and then we have amazing auction items, and it's just a fun night to come together and support the work that we do in this community on a regular basis. So if you want to learn more about it, you can find that information on our website, b2home.org. And we would love to see you all there.
And I heard one of your biggest auction items was lunch with Captain Diez.
Yeah, I think that's the one
it's always a big winner.
Well,
I'm gonna try to win that
hopefully
one.
we beat out Pat Springle, Fire Chief Springle and his crew.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well-
we'll raise some more money than those guys.
Yeah.
Well, the great thing is Justin loves soup, so sign him up. He'll be there February what?
He signed February 22nd.
February 22nd.
Yeah,
right,
we have
right.
him. We have him there. We put it on his calendar already.
Did you? Oh, thank you.
Any closing?
Yeah,
input
I
from you,
mean,
Justin?
yeah. What can they can do? Our community members, to help law enforcement or just help out. I think the biggest thing would be to notify law enforcement. If you see an encampment, if there's a car that's been parked on the street, for a few weeks, or a motorhome or things like that. And the reason is so we can track it, we can go and offer them resources, determine if any criminal activity is happening. So that's number one, notify law enforcement. And then we're working with city code enforcement all the time. They're on the phone probably, 5-6 days a week with each other. Our crime prevention unit and our homeless outreach service deputies always working with your guys and gals at code enforcement. So that covers that. Certainly supporting you guys, any nonprofit out here. If somebody from the community wants to get involved, I would say obviously support you guys. And then what I would recommend not doing from a public safety point of view is, if you see somebody in the middle of the median on McBean or Soledad or Newhall Ranch Road, which happens, I see them, not to, stop your car, get out of your car, give them money, give them food. Doing so, in my personal opinion, at least from public safety standpoints, exacerbating the problem. If you want to help, then help directly to you guys, and you guys can provide the help and or notify law enforcement. So I certainly do not support, providing food or money to somebody who's panhandling, because in our experience, it creates a litany of other issues, from traffic enforcement, pedestrian-related, other people watching somebody do that and then getting mad at the person who's trying to help out. I mean, it just creates a litany of problems. So those three things would help us out for anybody in Santa Clarita listening that wants to be a part of the solution.
Great. Well, Chris, Captain Diez, thank you very much for chatting with us today about the face and the issues dealing with homelessness here in Santa Clarita Valley. I want to say thank you. You both do an amazing job, Chris, with Bridge to Home and the services that you guys provide. And Captain Diez, as always, I don't think there's a more complicated job that's evolved other than law enforcement in the last few years, and you guys continue to step up, do an amazing job, and make this place as safe as it can possibly be. Yeah. So thank you both for your service, and thank you for listening to Santa Clarita Voices, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Santa Clarita Voices. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share. You can find Santa Clarita Voices on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the city's YouTube channel. Follow the city on social media at City of Santa Clarita. We'll see you next time.